Crystal Charter, Daughter of the Red Seal. Chapter 23. The funeral took place the day before Maebe was destined to set sail. She hadn't found a replacement secretary to organise the work that would pile up for her while she was in the Main. She had intended to visit the ships for last-minute inspections and discuss her plans, however minimal, with the captains, but she had done neither. The idea of work paralysed her, a life preparing for this moment, and now it had arrived, she holed herself up in her father's office. The future seemed a better place to leave those jobs. Sumine 3 would set sail before the other ships, and then be back by midsummer. The other 9 ships would set off at various intervals throughout the year to collect whatever she had arranged during her first visit, and perhaps additional items, if she trusted any of the captains to arrange them. She knew all of them by heart, but she hadn't the time or energy to think on it. Late next winter, they would all meet to discuss the following year, and discuss any repairs to the ships. By then, she hoped she would be ready. Her plan was to repeat her father's previous itinerary, and scrap his new one, which she hadn't thought to study. Discussing new arrangements and their existing trading contracts was something she hoped to avoid until the following year, and making new purchases was out of the question. Captain Hill visited to ask if she needed help inspecting any of the ships. She assured him that anything left this late could wait a little longer until she was back in Elpis. A list of last-minute requests from the palace and the guild had been left in the dockside officers, and she instructed him to distribute non-essential orders between each ship as he saw fit. Elsie stood, shadowed in the office doorway. "Miss Sumine, we leave for the funeral in 1 hour. You need to get changed," she whispered. "Gods," Maebe muttered, dropping a letter of condolence from Mouse. She didn't have time to finish reading it, but he had heard the news. She had vanished from Clest without even saying farewell to him. He seemed to be doing fine with the guild, as she knew he would. Days passed with Maebe engulfed in stress, fixed behind the office desk. She hadn't prepared an outfit for herself to wear, or even bathed that day. Washing as quickly as she could manage, she scrubbed ink from her hands and toweled her hair until it twisted into impossible tangles. Elsie brushed through the mess, using a comb carved from a single piece of crystal. It cut through Maebe's self-inflicted chaos, and was tamed by the silent maid into a braided and elegant, if damp, perfection. No time to dry it or try a new style. In the mirror, Maebe saw how it framed her face. Thinner than when she had last looked, and the red gleam seemed duller. It was practical for the occasion, though. Her father would have approved. She informed Maebe with a worried smile that an outfit had been laid out in her dressing room. Maebe scowled at the new clothes resting on the long ottoman. Black skirts, with wide lace trimming the bottom. A dark green cinch belt in a similar shade to her ruined cloak. She sighed at the small loss and went back to frowning at the white shirt, adjusted to have black bell sleeves that covered her hands. The style was loved by the ladies of the palace, but certainly had a flair for making it look outdated. "Who prepared the clothes?" Maebe grimaced, already aware of the answer. "Lady Taroo, mistress," Elsie responded, looking at the floor. The clothes looked ridiculous on her. They were suited to a woman with rounded figures, to emphasize curves. But Maebe's tall, flat figure and red hair made her look like somebody had tried to cinch a corset around the trunk of a birch tree in autumn. It would have to do, though. The ceremony was over in a flash of shaking hands, speeches, and exchanging stories that ended in awkward laughter, or the sobbing of somebody Maebe had never seen before. She hadn't cried. Her expression was unmoving in the face of weeping strangers and distant friends. Neither Maebe or her father believed in the gods, but his body was moved to the temple of Orid, god of the mountains and watcher of the northern continent. It was where all of her family eventually rested. She didn't know how she was supposed to respond to watching her father be moved underground. Crying like some others were. She had no tears, though. Only a cold, stained lump in her chest, like her heart had been replaced by the damp rag that had wiped her face clean of tears and been balled up deep inside of her, away from the rest of the world. Or anger. She was still angry with him for leaving her. There was a short farewell at the manor. Close friends visited to share quiet stories amongst themselves and celebrate his life. It filled the house with more people and witches than Maebe recalled ever seeing in her home. Borrowed servants darted between the foreign groups of friends and colleagues, and her own staff fluttered around trying to direct so many new faces about without causing any disturbances. He had been loved by so many, but none of them will feel his loss like me, she thought bitterly. A loose strand of hair fell over her face, and she brushed it away, sighing as the sleeves of her new shirt brushed against her cheek. Certainly hummed through the hall. Her dusky pink lace dress had the same black bell sleeves as Maebe. Her dark brown cinch belt was the same colour as her hair and eyes. She offered a sad smile and a warm hug to every person in attendance, singing her husband's praises as a kind, thoughtful man who did more to make her feel welcome than she deserved. He barely spoke to you, Maebe muttered to herself, leaving the circle that had gathered around her, talking about how unlikely they had thought it that Selden would remarry, let alone someone so young. The last of the unwelcome visitors streamed out of the door when the stars had come out to watch her grieve as well. Maebe's stony thank yous and gifts of tiny red memory crystals were passed into hands clutching handkerchiefs. Each finger-length shard she passed out held an image of her father, a token for those who wished to remember his face. After, Maebe headed to her room, rubbing her eyes. The unfamiliar tightness around her waist was becoming unbearable. Certainly Pot had passed her with a tray in her hands, giving every appearance of helping the servants tidy. Her father's words to Certainly flared in her mind. Find a hobby befitting this family. And Maebe knew what would make her feel better. In her dressing room, she yanked her cinch off, throwing it across the room. Waist liberation mixed with annoyance at having to wear the ghastly invention in the first place. A gasp of relief escaped her as she pulled loose the tightly pinned braids. They fell about her shoulders, silver streak mixing with the autumn-blessed colours of her hair. She scrubbed at her eyes once more and set about finding something comfortable to wear for scolding Certainly. Mr. Scavier's visit had left her beyond frustration. Under no circumstance would she accept that Certainly was allowed to intrude in her home, her life, even after her father's funeral. She wanted the woman to leave her home without the guilt of betraying her father. She'd never understood why he remarried her. She never asked why. It seemed foolish beyond any reason. Layer after layer of mourning clothing fell to the floor until she stood in her underclothes, peering into her armoire. All the comfortable clothes were packed away in neat piles. She salvaged a pair of casual trousers from the heap of not clean but not dirty clothes. Stacks of tops filled several shelves, and she spotted several of the unworn tunics she had taken to Clest. Since the funeral was finished, she could abandon the black sleeves. So she recklessly yanked on a navy blouse with a red brocaded collar. The motion pulled the whole pile out onto the floor and muted the thud of something falling out between the tops. She pulled her selected shirt over her head, then carelessly kicked at the pieces, torn between putting them away and leaving them for Elsie to do. A shining glass caught her attention. A tiny, stoppered vial lay on the floor amid the heap of shirts. half filled with iridescent fluid. As she scooped it up, the liquid swishing around the glass glowed without giving off light. She held it up to stare into the tiny bottle. The potion from the hedge witch in the forest with Mouse. A memory potion, Maebe whispered to herself. She could wipe her memory of the past few days, perhaps of the last year if the era shard had imbued itself with it. That's a stupid idea, she told herself. But a memory potion. She turned the possibilities over in her mind. It was forbidden to have it in the Green Kingdom. Potions were allowed as healing treatments. Quality potions were made in the Night Guild, but the strained relations with the Northern Landers left a gap in the market. She had 2 suppliers of potions in the main, who traded with brews from Artio Forest nature witches. They were mostly energy boosters, or simple healing medicines that warded against swamp poisons, and sold directly to the military, to be administered only in the presence of a military witch. Potions activated on ingestion or application, whether the recipient consented to its use or not. That was why they were monitored with more severity. Crystals show an obvious use of corruption if used to injure, and raw powers are diminished if used on an unwilling subject. The rules of consent affected most forms of magic, but not potions. The swirling liquid hypnotized Maebe with its pulsing power. If certainly were to ingest a memory potion, maybe she would forget that she lived in Spaceth Manor. She might forget her whole marriage and want to return to Seacrest. If Maebe was lucky, she could even get her to start packing tonight. Even if she only lost part of her memories, it would be in her best interest to return home to her family. No one would be able to say I went against my father's will if the poor girl was having health issues. She tucked the round-bottomed vial into her pocket with glazed eyes and dashed down the stairs, knowing where to head.